Hey there, rednecks, preppies, redneck preppies. It's me, the Redneck Preppy. How you doing today? Great, good. Fudd lore in firearms may be as old as, well, firearms themselves. When it comes to the chrysanthemum symbol on Japanese military rifles, there may be some fudding. At a minimum, though, there is a bit of a debate as to what the mum, as it is often called, actually represented. The orthodox view is that the mum was the symbol of the Japanese emperor, and it signified that whatever it appeared on meant that item was his property. So rifles with the mum during World War II belonged to God Emperor Hirohito and was merely entrusted to the soldier that was carrying it. There are those who argue, however, that a rifle's mum had no grandiose meaning. It was merely a mark that had been accepted into service by the Imperial Japanese Army or Navy. Why the distinction is important is a question of history. Many Japanese rifles today have mums that have been defaced. Now, if we believe the orthodoxy, the mums were immediately removed after the war so that the emperor wasn't disgraced by having his property captured by the enemy. If it's the other argument, then it was just merely a bureaucratic move to remove this rifle from official service. Well, which one is it? In past videos, I've advanced the orthodoxy, perhaps because it's the most commonly recounted version of events, or perhaps it's a more interesting one. But like I said, there's a lot of fudd lore. Have I been falling for some? Although it's not considered an academic resource, Duncan McCollum's Japanese Rifles of World War II contains a brief discussion that we'll use as the orthodox position. And he stated, the 16-petal chrysanthemum is the symbol of the Japanese emperor. It was stamped into the top of the receiver of Japanese rifles manufactured for the Imperial Japanese Army and signified that the arm was the property of the emperor. Now, McCollum goes on to say a few paragraphs later that the mums were ground off at the end of the war as a, and I quote, face-saving gesture, end quote, to avoid turning over property with the Imperial Mark. Now, I could quote other sources that say essentially the same thing, but if you believe that they're repeating fudd lore, more of the same is not going to convince you. It'll have to be the Japanese themselves, I hope, that provide the necessary evidence. Now, I've relied on a wonderful essay by the late Nick Komeya entitled The Chrysanthemum, the Rising Sun, and the Star for some of what follows. Now, first, some history. Now, up until the late 1860s, the chrysanthemum was a widely used symbol in Japan by both nobility and commoner alike. The flower was, and is, highly regarded in Japan for a number of cultural reasons. In 1868, the Meiji Restoration occurred, and over the following years, laws began to be passed which restricted the symbol's use. In 1871, it was essentially prohibited from use by anyone who wasn't a member of the imperial family. Now, this, not surprisingly, caused a bit of a kerfuffle in Japanese society because it was a popular symbol to put on virtually everything. And which version of the chrysanthemum emblem was disallowed? Now, the laws laid out a number of examples with pictures, but like everything, confusion lives in the margins. The chrysanthemum symbol first appeared on issued arms with the model 1880 Murata rifle, allegedly placed there by Tsuneyoshi Murata himself. Now, he allegedly did so to combat the problem of Japanese soldiers abandoning their rifles, which apparently was a big problem during retreats in the 1877 Satsuma Rebellion. Now, to me, this lends credence to the notion that the chrysanthemum was by then the accepted mark of the emperor, and by the 1880s, you couldn't just mistreat something with that sacred emblem on it. The Japanese continued tightening regulations around the symbol's use. In May 1880, they prohibited the sale of any items that had the chrysanthemum emblem on it and vigorously punished offenders. Now, it wasn't just the commercial sphere that was having problems with policing the use of chrysanthemums. The military had its issues as well. As a result, in April 1914, they issued Army Ordinance 1147, and it stated that the chrysanthemum mark on any rifle that was going to be destroyed, surplus to the public, or otherwise leaving military service must be removed first. Not only are items with the chrysanthemum emblems prohibited from exchanging hands in the private sector, as per decreed by the Ministry of Imperial Household Memo No. 2 of 5th May 1880, but policing of such by local police forces has become an issue. Now, why it was an issue was that despite the Army Ordinance, the Japanese military itself wasn't exactly all on the same page when it came to removal of the chrysanthemum emblem, or use for that matter. Police had long complained about finding ex-military weapons with the mum for sale in public shops. In fact, it wasn't until the ministry responsible for the imperial family got involved in 1925 that the military finally instituted a clear system of what would and wouldn't carry that chrysanthemum emblem. It was a policy that covered virtually everything from arms to buildings, and anyone who wasn't clear about the already existing chrysanthemum removal policy got learned. Now, about the same time, it was also clarified for police what was allowed to be used by commercial interests and the public, but that is the outside of the scope of this video. Now, the chrysanthemum didn't just appear on rifles, and anything that had the emperor's chrysanthemum mark was considered sacred. As an example, prior to World War II, the Imperial Japanese Navy reported that it had found a number of sake cups produced in 1905 for a celebration that had the imperial chrysanthemum symbol. To remove them from inventory, so to speak, the cups were thoroughly shattered and then buried to prevent anyone from getting their hands on that chrysanthemum emblem. In November 2014, media outlets reported that a Japanese temple had been safeguarding what had previously been a ship-mounted chrysanthemum that had been hidden there since July 1945 after the ship had run aground. The mum had been recovered by the Japanese military shortly after and brought to the temple to be secreted away from the enemy. For a mere acceptance mark, the chrysanthemum sure seems a pretty sacred one. I'm fairly confident in stating that the chrysanthemum was no mere acceptance mark, on par with, America's flaming bomb or the Third Reich's Waffenamt. Let's lay out what we know. Whether or not it was universally believed, it was at least commonly held that the imperial family was descended from the chief deity of the Shinto religion, Hirohito, along with every Japanese emperor going back millennia, claimed rule by divine right. Second, Japanese authorities, civil, military, and imperial, all worked to restrict the use of the imperial mum symbol, with those efforts only increasing over time. Regulations were even designed governing bodies like how the all-powerful military were to use it. Next, by the end of the Second World War, it had been accepted and legally enforced that the chrysanthemum in the form that we saw on military equipment like rifles was the exclusive symbol of the emperor, and it had been so at that point for 60 years, and arguably even a few decades longer than that. In 1914, the military itself declared that any firearms passing out of military service, whether surplused, sold to other countries, or presumably surrendered, must have the chrysanthemum emblem removed. We have innumerable examples of Japanese soldiers destroying or protecting the chrysanthemum symbol to avoid it falling into the hands of those deemed inappropriate to possess it before, during, and after the end of the Second World War. For me, the question remains settled. I find it difficult to believe that the mums were removed at the end of the Second World War because the Allies gave a hoot about Ordnance 1147. I also doubt that the average Japanese soldier wanted to check a bureaucrat's box that his rifle was no longer part of the IGA. I can believe that the Allies and whoever else played a part in mum removal were following some unspoken directive to save the face of an emperor who was needed to maintain stability in post-war Japan. Now, I'm not going to go over the theories of exactly who and how rifles had their mums removed after the war. I covered that already in a separate video, and there is a link in the description if you want to get into that quicksand. I doubt this video converted any minds, but hopefully I laid out my case as to why I believe the orthodoxy on chrysanthemums and Japanese rifles. At any rate, I hope you found today's video at least be vaguely entertaining and mildly informative. As always, I hope you have yourself a great day. Take care, and bonsai.